in the Wazazi nations. As a land-grant institution, I want to acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of these lands as we strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. I also need to acknowledge the longer history of these lands and our place in that history in an effort for me to continue to consider place and space. I also want to recognize that institutions of higher education serve as multi-generational sites of violence and dispossession, whereas African descendant people were subject to the violence of forced labor that continues to shape social and political life in many regions. For me, grappling with time, with space, with history, this work of memory is part and parcel of how we ought to think about and to contextualize our work. We're thrilled that you would join us in the Black Study and Education Lab's Black Research Approaches webinar series. Many thanks to those of you who have contributed to bringing this work together, including Drs. Alicia Dowd and Lawanda Ward, Director and Associate Directors, respectively, in the Center for the Study of Higher Education here at Penn State, Francisca Figueroa, Sharmista Barat, doctoral students at Penn State. Many thanks to Mary Pierce and Michael Morgan as well for their logistical support. Thank you to Dean Lawless and the College of Education as well at Penn State. Do feel free to add questions or reactions in the chat. You'll be able to find the recording of today's event on our Black Study and Education site and on YouTube. As we enter this moment, into this moment of Black history, we know that as we celebrate the month, we know it was an outgrowth of Negro History Week, which first occurred on February 7th, 1926. I'm reminded that for Carter G. Woodson, the week was concerned with tradition and reform, more specifically, celebration of Black traditions and culture and reform through rigorous study. Our hope in the Black Study and Education Lab is to participate in the latter. The Black Study and Education Lab is concerned with exploring the potentialities of Blackness in educational research, practice, and policy. The lab is dedicated to the radical affirmation of Blackness as capacious. Grounded in the belief that Black study is a force of disruption, we seek to destabilize existing epistemological protocols, challenging how knowledge is produced and disseminated. By harnessing Black study to detect and call forth otherwise possibilities, we refuse singularity and solutions to the problematic of anti-Blackness and embrace a dynamic, ever-evolving engagement with Black ideas. These commitments guide our rigorous engagement with Blackness and the Black condition, amplifying voices and experiences beyond institutional boundaries. Our aim is to deploy Black study as a project of critical analysis and imagining otherwise ways of knowing, doing, and being in the world, creating generative spaces for Black self-definition and Black futures. This webinar series grapples with the central question: what does it mean to center Blackness in educational research? The 2023-2024 webinar series invites scholars to discuss relationality, ethics, care, and on this afternoon, aesthetics. Black aesthetics oscillates between clarity and opacity and are underwritten by stories and ideas that are fleeting, flexible, new, and old. These stories and ideas, they teach us how to navigate infrastructures of harm. These stories and ideas reside within, across, and outside prevailing knowledge systems. Black aesthetics generates a deciphering practice, and this deciphering practice contextualizes Black worlds. I'm so elated to be in conversation with these brilliant speakers this afternoon on this conversation of Black aesthetics as we think about its potentialities in educational research. So allow me to introduce who you'll be in conversation with. First, our discussant, Dr. José Cossa. Dr. Cossa is a scholar, writer, author, researcher, poet, blogger, podcaster, entrepreneur, and associate professor in the College of Education at Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Cossa holds a PhD in cultural and educational policy studies with a depth area in comparative and international education from Loyola University, Chicago. He's the author of the book, Power, Politics, and Higher Education, International Regimes, Local Governments, and Educational Autonomy, the recipient of the 2012 Joyce Kane Award for Distinguished Research on People of African Descent, and one of the co-founders of the AI14 Africa Collaborative. Cossa's research focuses on power dynamics in negotiation over educational policy, unveiling issues inherent in the promise of modernity, and working towards decolonizing, debordering, deperipherizing, and decentering the world, higher education policy and administration, system transfer, international development, and global and social justice. Currently, COSA is working towards a recalling, restructuring, articulating, establishing, and engaging Cosmo Ubuntu as an Africa-derived exterior to modernity, interdisciplinary theory of justice. Thank you so much, Dr. Cossa, for joining us. Dr. Justin Coles is Associate Professor of Social Justice Education in the Department of Student Development at the University of Massachusetts Amherst College of Education. Within the college, Dr. Coles serves as the inaugural Director of Arts, Culture, and Political Engagement at the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. At the CRJ, Dr. Coles directs the Black Healing Joy and Justice Collective. Dr. Coles is socially and community engaged arts-based research, engages Black urban youth, creativity, and activism to inform counterstructures to oppressive US schooling policies, processes, and histories. Dr. Coles is a William T. Grant Theories of Blackness, Indigeneity, and Racialization in Research to Reduce Inequality in the Lives of Young People Writing Fellow. In 2023, Dr. Coles was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars at Morehouse College. Formerly a co-editor-in-chief for Equity and Excellence in Education, Dr. Coles currently serves on the International Editorial Board for Curriculum Inquiry. Additionally, Dr. Coles serves as co-chair for the American Educational Research Association Special Interest Group, Hip Hop Theories, Praxis, and Pedagogies. Most recently, Dr. Coles was appointed to the National Council of Teachers and English Research Foundation Board of Trustees. Dr. Coles is published in myriad academic journals. Thank you so much, Dr. Coles, for joining us. Dr. Gloria Wilson is an Associate Professor of Arts Administration, Education, and Policy at The Ohio State University, co-editor of A Love Letter to This Bridge Called My Back, and founder of Racial Justice Studio. Gloria is recognized for her work in Black studies, cultural studies, hip hop, and transnational feminisms, fugitive praxis, Afro-Asian solidarities, and as a facilitator for anti-racism workshops in museums and community spaces, utilizing arts-based pedagogies. Also a practicing artist, Gloria's multimedia work broadly examines notions of fugitivity, liberation, radical ancestry, and specifically examines the intersections of racial identity and arts participation. As an invited artist speaker, she has presented for Spelman College's Museum of Art Black Box series and has been the recipient of a Fulbright Award to study art, education, and culture in Tokyo and Ogisaga. Additionally, Gloria has presented workshops exploring creative thinking dispositions for Harvard Graduate School of Education's Project Zero. She is a steering committee member for Creative, a collective advocating for racial equity in the arts and education, and is current associate editor for the Journal of Cultural Research in Art Education. Her current art making focuses on the intersection of freedom dreaming, garment making, and print making, particularly with the Black Academic Project and forthcoming installation honoring the descendants of the Clotilda, survivors in Africatown, Mobile, Alabama. Her work has been exhibited in numerous museums and universities throughout the United States. I hope you all are as excited as I am to engage with these brilliant scholars. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Cossa, who will offer a framing for our conversation on this afternoon. Dr. Cossa.
Thank you very much, Brother Wilson, for this wonderful introduction. It's beautiful. It's great to be here with everybody present. And I'd like to, start with some, remarks that I hope will be, will do justice to this event. Black is beautiful. What a better way to start, as we're celebrating Black History Month. This is probably the way to start it. Black is beautiful, I will emphasize. So Amiri Baraka once said, if we study Yoquiano, Du Bois, Diop, Robert Thompson, and Leroy Jones, we will see that the single yet endless diverse African cultural matrix is the basis not only of what's called the blues aesthetic, but any Black aesthetic. I often argue that in African cosmologies, and more specifically, Sankofa, unrelated perceptions of time, the past, the present, and the future are interconnected, juxtaposed, and not mutually exclusive. Therefore, we ought to stop looking at children, youth, the elderly, the unborn, and the living dead, to borrow John Beatty's descriptor, as those of the present, the future, and the past, respectively. Instead, we are to see them as part of this complex, interlinked, juxtaposed, and not mutually exclusive reality. If we shift our ontological lenses to embrace African cosmologies, such as Sankofa and Ubuntu, we might be in a better position to understand and appreciate Black aesthetics inherent in our own interconnected human reality, rather than rely on separatist and hierarchical modernist perceptions as points of reference. Black aesthetics in research processes manifest through such aesthetics of time and human existence emanating from Sankofa and Ubuntu or Moon. Therefore, we cannot speak of Black aesthetics without thinking about the extent to which a timeless statement like Black is beautiful reaches. This should not be seen as merely a statement about outer beauty alone, but also as beauty in a whole range of spheres in which Black beauty manifests. And these spheres include the physical world, in which Black beauty is represented through visuals such as the body, swagger or swag, movement, fashion, variety of art forms, etc. The spiritual world, constituting the core of the cosmological and philosophical, non-discriminatory perceptions of human, such as Ubuntu, that is a person unto, because, with persons. And to cite the incredible work of my sister and friend Hanada Vete Congolo, Tout Mun Semon, that is, all human persons are human persons, both constituting perceptions that Africa offers to the world as a free gift, not impositions. And the third aspect, soulful intellectual world, depicted by the construction of social fabrics and more than empires or kingdoms, not just empires, but more than empires and kingdoms, comprising intricate wisdom, opulence, resilience, and advancements of all sorts. We could perhaps depict Black aesthetics in research processes through a soulful recognition of the wisdom and humanitarian aesthetics inherent in Mansa Musa's kind sharing of opulence with those whom Mansa and the Malian Black physical bodies that traveled with Mansa Musa, the ancestors, who accompanied him, and the people who stayed home, and at the same time were with the group that traveled, were connected spiritually with them at all times. And the land and the cosmos that enveloped the travelers all night and all day, every second of the way. If we allow ourselves to learn from Mansa Musa's expedition, perhaps Black aesthetics and research processes could be characterized by a sharing and exchange of knowledge with, not extraction from, those whom we encounter in our research journeys, and by a curating, not creation, of knowledge. Like Mansa Musa's gift of gold to Egypt that devalued gold as a commodity for a considerable time, Black aesthetics and research processes could perhaps constitute the much needed revolutionary force that will devalue Western modernist research processes that have portrayed themselves as the hegemonic commodity in the sphere of research processes. With this, I will now pass the microphone to our two distinguished speakers so we can learn with them about what we came here for, Black aesthetics in research processes as the material, affective, theoretical preoccupations that animate Black living. Thank you very much. So I think it's Dr. Cole who comes first, or Dr. Wilson, one of you, yeah. But thank you.
Is it okay to share my screen? Can everybody see that? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I would first like to thank all who helped organize this invitation for exploration of Black aesthetics in educational research. Thank you, Dr. Okello, for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Cossa, for our opening and framing. I'm honored to be here with you all to think and breathe and learn together. Over the course of my academic career in the field of art education, I have been unknowingly working toward an otherwise. And along this journey, the intellectual tradition of Black studies has been foremost influential in my work as an artist, a researcher and educator, and most recently, the humanities and critical human geography have informed the way that I think with what creative forms have to offer toward a liberatory arts praxis. These traditions have been essential and support my work in ways that none of these alone could do. But first, a big ups. A presentation such as this, although seemingly authored by one person, only comes into existence and fruition through years of intense reading, living, being with the ovaric workings of Black women creatives. My ongoing musings are in conversation with the works in critical human geography, the arts, and humanities. The works of Christina Sharp, Torkwase Dyson, and Catherine McKittrick, who you see on the screen, have all served my aesthetic approach to Black study, offering a path forward through their grammar of abstraction, metaphor, and Black method. And when thought together, I raise questions about how these disciplines can be utilized to understand and articulate Blackness and a pedagogy of self-liberation in the face of pervasive anti-Blackness. Their work accompanies me daily and has carried me this distance as of today, and I am so humbled. It is also in their wake that for this presentation, I'd like to offer a way to think with these questions. What constitutes Blackness and Black life in the diaspora? And what forms of creative production form a Black consciousness and tools for refusing death and offer possibilities for living? So in this precious time I share in community with each of you today, I'd like to continue to think and work through an ongoing project that I've spent the better part of 5 years with. And building from these questions is my assertion of a framework which extends beyond mere intellectual understanding or academic engagement. It involves aesthetic approaches that begin from the Black, the lived, the felt, the shared, the histories of community, felt in the bones, in the rhythms, and in the shared narratives that bind us together. It's Frankie Beverly and Maze, for instance. It's Nina Simone and Strange Fruit. It's Alexis Pauline Gumbs and What We Can Learn from Marine Animals. It's Playing the Dozens and Playing Spades. It's Double Dutching in the Street. It's Spillers, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe. It's Toni Morrison and Beloved and more. It emphasizes the ways in which Black creatives contribute to a humanizing aesthetic. The true essence of a radical ancestry emerges through ceremony and shared ritual. A Blackened composition emerges and emphasizes that the intention is not to explain or resolve questions of Black exclusion and terror directly. Instead, the focus is on asserting that Black life is more than the terror that calls it into existence, emphasizing the richness of the Black experience. It calls for a longue durée engagement with the struggles and triumphs of the elders and ancestors, a sense of kinship that transcends intellectual discourse. A Blackened composition in this context is not a theoretical abstraction, but a visceral and lived reality. It highlights the interconnection of these three domains, the humanities, geography, and the arts, as generative sites for inquiry, theorization, and grappling with the challenges posed by what is termed an industry of objecthood. I argue that when these three areas of study are considered together, they become powerful catalysts for aesthetic insurrection. To illustrate an aesthetic approach to Black study, I introduce a meditation on Black composition. Thank you all for joining me in my third public reading of this short text. What are the aesthetics of liberation? Liberation from living in the omissions. Annotated lives embody the Black. 35,000 middle passages. Geographic inheritances. Elmina, the door of no return. Middle passage womb produces the Black. Ovaric, atmospheric, 35,000 echotones. Partus sequitur ventrum. Precarious birth, Blackness. Precious cargo, shipped, held in the hold. Black within the holding of the ship. How then does Black create a space out of no space? What does it mean to be held there? What are the logics of legibility in the no space? Black moves in no space arrangements. Possibility out from dispossession. A Blackened composition. Aesthetic arrangements, legibility, Blackness, infinite. Atemporal, consciously historic. Spatial, arrangements of pathways and throughways. Geographic, diasporic. Ecological blueprints, self-liberation. Polysensorial, collective utterances, Blackness. Imagining otherwise worlds. Black ports, errant. Determined, refusal. Nonlinear logics, sonic, haptic, visual, kinetic. Defend the dead, compose. On an early Wednesday in September in a hospital in Grand Forks, North Dakota, Gloria, Rosario, and Henry Joseph would welcome their second baby girl into the world. Glorita Jeanette is what they would name this second girl child. Only the nurses would disregard the mother's request and would hastily scrawl the name Gloria rather than include the T, which would have satisfied the mother's simple request. The parents, a Black American man from Mobile, Alabama, and a Filipina Chinese Spanish woman from Cebu City, Philippine Islands. No one could have predicted how this instance would resurface later in their little girl's life, nor could anyone have predicted how this would later influence how she came to understand the world she would be positioned in, how this positioning must be navigated, and how she would eventually position herself to respond. If you haven't guessed by now, I am Glorita Jeanette, although my government records suggest otherwise. So I'm the really happy looking kid on the left. And I share that story with you because it's just one of many that my parents have shared with me that I've archived in my mind. These archives reflect an ongoing assemblage of sorts, bundled together and rooting deep, and have moved me to be here today to share with you a macro peek at how I come to the knowledge I have and the research questions I pose. So in other words, not just what I know, but where I know from. I used to be concerned with how I and others like me bring our full selves into spaces and places without needing to mask, making ourselves small in order to ease others' comfort. Scholar and researcher Luis Sanchez offers, quote, "Personal values, views, and location in time and space influence how one understands the world," end quote. In this context, gender, race, class, sexuality, and other aspects of identities are indicators of social and spatial positions that are not fixed, given qualities. Positions act on the knowledge one has about things, both material and abstract. Some knowledge is the product of a specific position that reflects a particular time, place, and space. And as stated in my bio, my area of study is rooted in the field of art education, which places me somewhere along a continuum of being an arts practitioner and educator. I'm formally trained in photography, printmaking, fiber arts, ceramics, oil painting, and others. I'm also a former middle school and high school art teacher. My journey from the public school classroom and into higher education was as much informed by my formal schooling as it was from my experiences growing up in and outside of a country whose roots are grounded in racial classifications and hierarchies. The question, "Where do you know from?" asks something different than "What do you know?" I know from Henry Wilson's gumbo and bamboo earrings in the 9th grade. I know from Corrine Wilson's "Chow Please" and Gulf Coast Mardi Gras. I know from Ebenezer Baptist Church choir singing and from the smell of my daddy's cooking chitlins, as well as him going off to Vietnam during the war in hopes of making his way back to my mother. I know from the Divine Nine, the collective of colors, the salmon pink and the apple green, the crimson and the cream, the royal blue and the white, the royal purple and the old gold, the charcoal brown and the gilded gold, the black and the old gold. I know from where my mother knows from also. I was marked with racial identity when my family moved to the US from the Philippines in the 1980s, and I began compulsory schooling. Sitting on the floor as my mother brushed my hair, she would say, "If anyone asks you to fill out a form at school, you are to check the box marked Black." I had no real sense of what this meant. I was about age 6, but instead listened carefully to my mother's instructions. The legally sanctioned one-drop rule has served as an oversimplification and arbitrary social standard within US racial categorization. This rule meant that any person, irrespective of age and gender, who was believed to have African ancestry was considered Black. This is where I am positioned. From this position, I continue to think and reflect on potential articulations and conjurings of an arts praxis, which explores how aesthetic modalities, alongside considerations of space, land, historical consciousness, and critical pedagogies, can contribute to our collective and self-liberation. A geospatial arts praxis emerges to challenge traditional frameworks and offer new possibilities for understanding Blackness within all sorts of spatial conditions. For instance, Black Power Naps is a soft sculpture installation and has been articulated as a vibrational device and curatorial initiative that reclaims rest as protest and idleness as power. As Afro-Latinx artists, Navlet Acosta and Fanny Sosa's Black Power Naps is a direct response to the sleep gap, which these artists see as a continued form of state-sanctioned punishment born from the ongoing legacy of slavery. They believe that reparation must come from the institution under many shapes, one of them being the redistribution of rest, relaxation, and downtime. This aesthetic intervention exceeds and therefore disrupts the forms of trauma-induced materialities which exist in much of the research we do and images of state-sanctioned violence we see. This aesthetic pronouncement is a pedagogical tool by which we might collectively be inspired to action. If we think with the question of where do you know from, it may help us to also think with this question: what creative methodologies are most useful in composing Blackness, which refuses death and a white stream art world? Black consciousness, when brought in concert with creative production and deep study of long-term historical structures, serve as tools for refusing death and offer possibilities for living in diaspora. These practices exemplify a refusal of the outsider voyeuristic gaze and consumption of Black life and Blackness as a fungible commodity. I wanted to reconfigure Blackness. Toni Morrison. Brianna's Garden is a virtual reality experience created by Lady Phoenix in collaboration with Janiyah Palmer, Breonna Taylor's little sister, who is also an activist. The intention of this project is to honor the life of Breonna Taylor while cultivating a safe space online to process complex emotions such as grief. Brianna's Garden is a sacred space for anyone who wants to share a message of hope for Brianna's family, or a message in remembrance of someone they miss. Initially, Lady Phoenix sensed a need for a safe space online where her family and friends could mourn. It soon became apparent that entire communities needed a place to process their grief. Quote, "We created Brianna's Garden to honor the life of Breonna Taylor with the intention that it be a peaceful refuge, unencumbered by the weight of the world." End of quote. Much of the creative direction has been informed by Janiyah, who described Brianna's love for flowers, butterflies, and music. Education scholar Bettina Love and human geography scholar Catherine McKittrick write about how Black worlds and Black ways of being breach the heavy weight of dispossession. They highlight the liberatory cues inherently embedded in the arts. So while I was in grad school, I felt the need to make something in order to process my own experiences and understanding of these strategies, survival mechanisms. In 2016, I made the ceremonial graduation gown you see here. It serves as a metaphor and provocation representing that precarious relationship to the arts, K-12 schooling, and the relationship of Blackness to higher education spaces. I took to garment construction like my two uncles, who were tailors, and recreated the ceremonial doctoral regalia. As an aesthetic-based form of inquiry and representation, this work aided me in examining what this might mean for how I and others who look like me navigate the education pipeline as students and educators and creatives. We need new vocabularies to think about articulating from the position of Black life. My aesthetic dialogues continue with Christina Sharp, Torkwase Dyson, and Catherine McKittrick. This is my approach to Black study, which then becomes the method for processing a Blackened composition. In what ways is Blackness composed, and how have we composed ourselves? How might one articulate and conjure an aesthetic praxis and pedagogy of self-liberation through engagement with radical ancestorship? Taking notice of the genocidal, ecocidal, and biocentric logics of imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism, scholars have invoked that Blackness is an analytics of hegemonic invention. As such, it can be disrupted through radical ancestorship. I suggest that the trifecta of the humanities, Critical human geography and the arts, when thought together, are generative sites of inquiry. And when assembled together, they open up a world of meaning, critical thought, radical theory making, and perhaps aesthetic insurrection. The work of contemporary artist and abstractionist Torkwase Dyson may help to illuminate this. Dyson's work directs us to the political potential of shape and surface to imagine and build new worlds. In a liquid place, the sculptures, which are semicircular in form, rest on the center of their arcs with a triangular void running along the sagitta. The exhibit is accompanied by sound installation, performances, and a generous number of talks with artists and curators. Perhaps the void is a gateway, perhaps it's a shelter. I continue to think about what might constitute a Blackened composition, and then expanded on abstracted grammars through concepts of radical ancestry. The ongoing wayfinding, navigation, and creative interventions taken up by Black people in resistance are brought up by Catherine McKittrick, as well as scholar Tao Lee Goff. The implications of being positioned to have to navigate these systems of state-sanctioned violence is what curator and Black studies scholar Christina Sharp refers to as the wake. In her conceptualization of wakes, Sharp offers 4 instantiations. First, she describes the close succession and deathly repetition of her own family members and what it means to sit with someone as they die. In doing this, she demonstrates the important care work of sitting together in the pain and sorrow of Black death as a way of marking, remembering, and celebrating a life, a homegoing. This is the beauty of Black study. It allows for critique of imperialist and colonial projects, but also offers an orientation toward an imagining otherwise world. Liberation is possible. During the spring of 2021, when I began this aesthetic project titled Black Composition, I was in deep thought about the Clotilda, the last documented slaver to make its illicit port in Mobile, Alabama around 1860. The writing of Black composition is the antecedent to what would become a deeper investigation of connection to living borders and intersections, an Afro-Filipina deep South and transnational orientation. From here, in the in-between, a Blackened composition is teased out in I Imagine an Afterlife of Slavery. To these ends, I question how anti-Blackness shows up in the arts and education ecosystems, and the words of critical sociologist Ruha Benjamin, what are we pretending not to know today? Expanding on Torkwase Dyson's abstracted grammars, and then positioning myself from this grammar and logic has allowed me to explore a Black geospatial history through the highlighting of these multidimensional aesthetic meditations. In other words, the stories of Black people liberating themselves across time, inventing with materials around themselves, inventing while a systematic order of degradation is always happening. Christina Sharp and Catherine McKittrick's theory methods acknowledgement of non-traditional academic texts make me want to dance with music lyrics, the wobble, the cha-cha slide, get in them kitchens, hot combs and hair grease. Interior lenses that make Black life visible. These genealogical lines of descendant trace continuously. Critical human geographies, the humanities and the arts when thought together, allows us to think with the potential transformation of our violent inheritances and the hostile weather which support interlocking systems of oppression. I want to reconfigure Black livingness. It seems that a theorization and method for such livingness in excess of quotidian, extraordinary, and mundane acts of violence begin with refusal to be governed by logics of capture. It is from this position that we share with one another how we translate what we inherit, invent, and add to the conversation to imagine a more livable present. I leave you with a first public reading of a writing for the Clotilda Project. What are the aesthetic materializations of precious cargo, captured and living transports, marined and marooned, carried, 110 middle passengers. Womb contains and carries the insured and insured. Generational inheritances. Middle passage. After birth, aftermath. Passenger and calculation. Reproduced. Partus sequitur ventrum. Precarious birthmark. Precious cargo. 110. Bundled, bound, shipped, carried. Held in the hold of the ship. Securities. Held in the body. Secured. Hold on, precious. What does it mean to hold and carry one there? What does it mean to be held and carried there? Waterways and wakes, ships and wombs, cradled and cradled. Cargo. What does it mean to claim that which is uninsured? Engulfed. 1959, Mobile, Alabama. Thank you.
Dr. Coles. Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson, for this wonderful presentation. So we'll hear now Dr. Coles, and we'll then engage in a conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I almost just needed a moment, and so much I want to say and feel. And yeah, so I guess we'll have time for that. But yeah, thank you for that. And I'm actually really even more fascinated in, I think, the ways that sort of our talks will weave together, and then the different entry points and different points of divergence for that. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay, is everyone able to see clearly? Okay. So I ground my exploration of Black aesthetics as an animator of Black life with you all today through the question, how do we see Blackness before a grammar of death takes hold? That is, how do we create the capacity in our mind to see, know, and feel Blackness as love and untether ourselves from the distorted anecdotes and fallacies that tell us Blackness is all things death and decaying matter? A foundational part of this for me has been moving from our external realities, namely anti-Blackness, while still keeping the regime as core to my analysis, to the interiors of Blackness. That is, searching for the Black worlds within. I am thinking about the Black within Black aesthetics without ignoring the very real racial realities of anti-Blackness. My discussion with you all today will be part ethnographic, part youth research and theory, and really part just me dropping in random Black shit that has been helping me understand the death logics of anti-Blackness and how a frame of Black aesthetics can work in opposition, right, to such structure in humanizing and liberatory ways. My favorite Black queer poet, Denez Smith, has a poem called Dear White America. And the poem functions as a Dear John letter of sorts, explaining why this Black person, Denez, has left America and actually planet Earth altogether. An expression to be fugitive to all of Earth makes sense when we consider W.B. Du Bois's remarks when discussing the imperial origins of World War I, where he stated, "I am given to understand that whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever. Amen." Dear White America, then, can be seen as a rejection of white earthly possession. Combining excerpts from Smith's poem, I am drawn to these portions that I have here. Smith says, "I've left Earth in search of darker planets, a solar system revolving too near a black hole. I've left Earth to find a place where my king can be safe, where Black people ain't but people, the same color as the good, wet earth. Until that means something, until then, I bid you well, I bid you war, I bid you our lives to gamble with no more. I have left Earth, and I am touching everything you beg your telescopes to show you. In this New Testament, this new story, you cannot see or touch or ruin, if only this one is ours." So the title of my talk with you all, right, like Darker Planets, Darker Gazes, is directly in response to my wrestling with Smith's poetic Afrofuturist concept of having left Earth as an entry point, or a rather foundational way that I've been thinking with Black aesthetics, particularly in the sort of twofold way of like one rejecting white recognition and then the other cultivating Black darker worlds. As a lover of Black arts and letters, I find myself always making sense of Blackness through such mediums. And Smith's poem and the themes of it are directly in the lineage of Black aesthetics, tracing back to the Black arts movement, which is considered the artistic and cultural sister movement of the Black Power movement. Central to the Black arts movement was documenting Black life through a variety of artistic modalities. And Schomburg curator Sylviane Diop says was done as a way to present their experiences and thoughts as a means of forming community and expanding existing narratives around what it meant to be Black in the United States and the world. The relationship between the movements for Black arts and Black power, they go on to say, fostered a new aesthetics, declared that Black was beautiful, saw art as an integral part of the revolution, and promoted education as a vehicle for social and political transformation. Being part and parcel of the Black arts and power movements, Black aesthetics can be understood as a creative, social-political tool to advance racial justice for Black people. Given its connection to the Black Power movement, I deduce that Black aesthetics is and must continuously be birthed out of an intentional racial politics, a Black racial politics specifically, that seeks to center and uplift Black ways of being and knowing, or sort of a Black sort of onto-epistemological stance in the face of ongoing Black degradation. Black aesthetics then is a tool, or rather an embodied state of being and knowing and creativity that works to demonstrate a love of and for Blackness by turning inward, seeking value in Blackness rather than seeking value and affirmation from external factors, right, and realities such as sort of the anti-Blackness of the earth. So I want to ask, how do we use Black aesthetics to understand the making of new Black worlds? Thinking both through theory and epistemology, I conceptualize Black aesthetics and education specifically as a narrative or set of propositions that helps Black educators know, do, and become Black world-making pedagogues in their practice. Judith Madeira explains that the epistemes of Black world-making were building blocks, shaped through inhabiting spaces of racial capital and living through the lens of racial difference. At the same time, world-making could be about rearranging the known world through interpretation. To theorize Black aesthetics is to theorize Black world-making. Foundational to Black aesthetics as a tool for Black world-making is untethering ourselves from the white gaze, seeing it as peripheral to Black life. As Tora Monahan explains through his reading of Paul Gilroy, in a backdrop of racial oppression and exclusion, the concept of a universal aesthetic has come into being through the presumed inferiority of Black creative expression and aesthetic capabilities. Black aesthetics is about the creation of Black self-conscious worlds, powered through a Black ethos or a cultural spirit that prevents Black people from being imprisoned by anti-Black structures and ideologies meted out by the US nation state. In Addison Gill's discussion of the Black aesthetics in the Harlem Renaissance, he shares insights into how artists and authors grounded their cultural productions in a rejection of whiteness or wanting to be white, instead turning inward to a spiritual and cultural focusing on Blackness, or my favorite, a Black soul. Thinking with Black aesthetics as foundational to Black world-making and consequently the sustaining of Black worlds refuses a total existence and what Paul C. Taylor refers to as whitely world construction. Whitely captures the ways of interpreting, navigating, and inhabiting the world that are consistent with or that follow from white supremacist ideology. Thus, I want us to think about Black aesthetics as an attack on anti-Black society's systemic presupposition of legitimate Black invisibility and bondage through the refusal of succumbing to whitely worlds or whiteliness. While visions of leaving Earth in the vein of Danette Smith's Dear White America may sound impossible, one day, as many of us probably do know already, it will have to happen, right? But not just for Black people, for all people. I recently listened to an NPR News Now podcast, which I listen to daily, and they noted that astronomers spotted a sun-like star puffing up and expanding to engulf a Jupiter-like planet. According to one astronomer, what we refer to as the sun would eventually do that to Earth, perhaps some 5 billion years from now, of course. However, it seems that Black people cannot wait 5 billion years for the world to be destroyed. Thinking with the ethnic studies orientation of being attentive to the histories of racial formation and how they unfold over time, given societal conditions, I want to use this space with you all as an offering of my thinking through the futurities of Black racial formations that may be imagined from elsewhere. By elsewhere, I am particularly thinking about creating and sustaining Black racial formations that are birthed through darker gazes of Black being and thought, gazes that birth darker planets, or dark Black-centric socio-spatial modes of existence. Blackness is a racial, cultural, social positioning that is marginalized in US and global society. So what we're rejecting external, socially constructed views of Blackness by seeking internal guidance from the interiority of Blackness allow us to see and know better. A Black elsewhere comes into being through being fugitive to current settler anti-Black social spatial logics that have constructed a whitely planet and that prompts the erecting of a blackly darker world. I locate the tools of erecting darker planets as residing in the cultural aesthetics of Blackness, which embody a Black gaze of being and knowing in the world, or, as mentioned earlier, a Black onto-epistemology. I understand Smith's articulation of having left Earth in his poem, Dear White America, as capturing the ways he abandons and invites us to abandon violent gazes rooted in whiteness and logics of anti-Blackness to center Black logics or a Black ethos that exists outside of and beyond whiteness. In other words, I interpret leaving Earth not only in the imaginative Afrofuturist sense, but also in a more realistic sense of untethering ourselves psychically and materially from the death logics of anti-Blackness. Thus, I want to think about leaving Earth to create Black worlds as a reorientation and recommitment to centering Black aesthetics. I focus on Black aesthetics, right, as key to Black world making due to its ability to push Black people away from the violent grips of whiteness and toward the rehumanizing grips of Blackness. In thinking about leaving Earth and creating alternative Black worlds, I want to name first my relation to this geographical nightmare that is the white settler supremacist and anti-Black lands we are on, that our distorted histories, laws, textbooks, and teachers have told us are now the continental United States. I name my relation to this place as being a descendant of the enslaved. Thus, I am thinking with the ways the construction of US geography was and continues to be made legible through the transoceanic crossing of African peoples. As Joe Fagan notes, the system of slavery was hellish and deadly. Through the Middle Passage, the humanity of African peoples was suspended, rendered a non-possibility, and particularly as Hortense Spiller shares, such suspension took hold as African peoples were thrown in the midst of a figurative darkness that exposed their destinies to an unknown. Lamar Jarrell Bruce lets us know that the Middle Passage is responsible for deranging millions of African peoples, right, across continents, oceans, centuries, and life worlds. Bruce's use of the range is meant to signal that the Middle Passage and the anti-Black modernities it inaugurated cast the African as categorically mad, wild, perverse, subrational, pathological, and mentally unsound. So I see it as my responsibility to name this history, wading my way through being suspended in time in both a figurative and very tangible darkness. Thinking with the moving lyrics of James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing, it is my responsibility to acknowledge that with each step I take in North American modernity, I am wading through paths of the blood of the slaughtered. Say their names. I have tried, but there are far too many. To be clear, I know that I am a descendant of a larger, more expansive, less US-centric, more beautiful origin to a Black story, where Black people were royalty, and in many places continue to be, or just simply free, ordinary people with their own indigenous customs, rituals, and traditions. Being born in the late 80s and being raised in the 90s makes me a Black child birthed and reared in a cultural context of what I like to call beautiful mass Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism. So please do not mistake my intellectual decision to center an analysis of slavery and anti-Blackness and my storying of Black aesthetics as a misreading of global Black history. I make this choice to make sense of my now tangible, everyday realities on the settler colonial lands, where at any given moment, I can be killed for being both a fetish and a phobia, and where the soil under my feet, your feet, the soil where our laptops are currently plugged in, which is allowing us to speak so freely about Black shit, is quite literally nurtured by Black bodies. As I theorize, there we go. As I theorize what to do in the meantime, in between time, as Kiana Mariah Ross would say, of my plan to build new blacker and darker planets, I do choose to embrace this soil and honor the lineage of my ancestral peoples. What if I thought of Black aesthetics as being in community with land and the soil nurtured by Black people, and more specifically, the wilderness, or a return to the wild? As a Black man in the heritage of Gullah Geechee, tracing my descendants to the Frogmore Plantation in South Carolina, I cannot help but to think about the ways my ancestors, and some still engage in the rite of passage ritual of seeking, a ritual to enter the Black church community where one will be set in the wild alone to communicate with natural objects, ancestors, and God. In a documentary, Miss Irene Shipman talks about her seeking journey. When I got to be 13, she says, I went out in the wilderness and I prayed until I got converted and I was baptized and I got my right hand of fellowship in the prayer house. That means that you are a member of the congregation now. A commenter in response to Miss Irene's words, right, that have been circling all throughout social media recently, mentioned, you go in the wilderness because that's where your ancestors waded in the fucking water. It's where they died when trying to make it to their destinations. It's blood in that soil. It's spirits in that water. It's life. It's where you can hear and see clearly. So I asked, what if the darker planets we are in search of are actually right in front of us, or rather below us? What if Black world making isn't actually about leaving Earth, right, in the sense of the Ness myth, but finding the alternate universes we possess within? Since I think with anti-Blackness as core to my analysis, I want to make it clear that today I am narrating a story to you all, not of death, but rather a story of the structures that wish me dead. And how with that, I am speaking with Black aesthetics as a testimony to the witnessing of darker planets, or perhaps an offering, or even as an invitation for you to go seeking in the wilderness of Blackness with me, where you might receive your own figurative right hand of fellowship and be baptized anew as a way to understand the multitudes of love that undergird a Black aesthetic orientation in a way that propels you to look death in the face, to hold its hand even, and say, I will not die. But what happens when the grammar of death brought on by anti-Blackness does come knocking on our doors? I still think of Trayvon Martin's body lying cold and dead in the rain. As a millennial Black man, I am no stranger to images of Black death. 4 years before I was born, Philadelphia police launched a targeted attack against the Movement Move organization on May 13th, 1985, which resulted in shooting 10,000 rounds of ammunition from automatic weapons, machine guns, and anti-tank guns, and dropping a bomb on the members' residence, which resulted in the death of 5 Move adult members and 6 children. The Move bombing, which resulted in 61 homes being destroyed and 250 people being left unhoused, took place less than 3 miles from the house in which I was raised. Being in such proximity to Move, including the ways I was educated about the bombing as I grew into Black boyhood, has given the images of Osage Avenue burning to the ground residence in my mind. I have looked at the images, one you see here, and video footage so much throughout my lifetime that I often feel my body has a sort of ancestral memory of that time and place, almost giving me the ability to smell the fiery smoke and the burning of a Black neighborhood as a way to remember that I am immersed in a climate of anti-Blackness. 2 years after my birth, Rodney King was severely beaten by Los Angeles police on video camera footage, captured by a bystander who lived in the neighborhood where he was pulled over. The images of Rodney's face are also permanently imprinted in my mind, a part of my individual and collective Black ancestral memory. I often feel as if I can hear the clubs and batons striking his flesh, and that I can see the ghoulish faces of the officers who were all acquitted on any criminal charges, beating him ruthlessly. So you see, I am no stranger to the grammar of death that greets Black people on lands where they were once enslaved as chattel, commodities, and where they are still living in the wake of such terror and destruction. Yet the death of Trayvon strikes me out of all the stories of Black violence under conditions of white settler terror, because it was not a story I was told, but rather a story that I witnessed unfold. A story that was really a catalyst for my turn to theorizing Black aesthetics as oppositional to the US's geography of death. I received my doctoral degree, right, in curriculum instruction and teacher education from a program that has consistently ranked #1 in the nation for educator preparation. I attended my program because I wanted to engage deeply in understanding the relationship Blackness has with curriculum, and more specifically, the ways teachers were trained or not to be attentive to matters of anti-Blackness. As you can guess, I quickly realized that at the highest level of preparing doctoral students to train teachers and become curriculum theorists, that there was a severe lack of knowledge dissemination that explicitly oriented us to understanding teaching and learning as highly politicized in a social context of anti-Blackness. Given that I began my degree in August 2013, as the trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin was unfolding, I was searching to develop my understanding of the ways the field of teacher education was attentive to the structural regime of anti-Blackness and the ways it informs curriculum development and larger educative processes. My goal here is not to indict my doctoral program or any other programs. Rather, my aim is to critique the way educational institutions at large can and must do a better job at protecting the livelihoods of Black youth, right, given the ways anti-Blackness operates. I believe that turning to theorizations of Black aesthetics that have long been conceptualized by Black intellectuals, many you see here, Black scholars, artists, and lived out in real time by everyday Black people can serve as a pathway forward to engaging in research and pedagogical processes with Black youth and Black people more generally that moves us toward liberatory methods through focusing on the interior lives of Blackness, which again, I believe can lead to Black world creation. Right? To be clear then, core to my thinking with Black aesthetics is Black liberation. Trayvon Martin's death, just like the deaths of MOVE members and the beating of Rodney King, was distorted by anti-Black truths. Narratives about Trayvon's Black existence were communicated through lenses of criminality, dehumanization, unfounded fear logics that can be directly traced to histories and ideologies that have long sought and still seek to construct Black being as inherently dangerous and therefore deserving of unimaginable violences. While other white supremacist and anti-Black discourse may have been removed from public policy documents, it was replaced with an unwritten doctrine of white educational and cultural supremacy, right? Which makes organizing for Black liberation in our current societal moment more crucial, right? So when I'm thinking about Trayvon Martin and sort of the calls for multiculturalism in this moment where we were in with Black Lives Matter, where people were saying that we were post-racial, I'm really thinking also about Black aesthetics as this sort of recommitment to sort of truth-telling. And so this recommitment to truth-telling in the Black liberation tradition becomes particularly evident in the moment of Trayvon's murder, since the nation was under the leadership of the country's first Black president, which for many signaled a falsehood that Black people were unrestricted by their race and anti-Black racism, right? Beyond the vigilante murder, though, of Trayvon Martin by a white Hispanic male serving as a reminder to the U.S. public about the disposability of Black life, it also reminded me of how Black disposability is mirrored in our nation's schools. More importantly, Trayvon's death, which occurred during my time as an 8th grade literature teacher to predominantly Black and brown children, led me to turn to the necessity of centering Black liberation and the move toward equity and justice in our teaching and learning processes as a political method for disrupting anti-Blackness. A major standpoint of Black education is the realization and acknowledgement for a large number of Blacks that all education is unequivocally political, and Black education can ill afford to be less so. Thus, for those invested in countering anti-Black ideologies and practices, understanding truth-telling as political is a necessity. As Ragland notes, truth-telling can reveal historical exclusions, and we need to more actively engage truth-telling, particularly vis-a-vis Black experiences and liberation struggles. If anti-Blackness positions Black people to live in a social context where their humanity, particularly the goodness or value of their humanity, is continually in question or dismissed, I would say that a stance of Black aesthetics works to dispel the false truths of Blackness having no value. And so I just want to check if I'm where I'm at with time. Maybe well. Okay. I keep going. Maybe about 5 minutes. Okay. Just a few more slides. So growing up in a household where my mother was a teacher in inner city Philadelphia, right? One of the reasons why I became a teacher, I was immersed in the aesthetic practices of a Black urban woman pedagogue. And so as a child, I did not have the terminology of Black aesthetics in my linguistic repertoire, but my mom was engaging what I have come to know as Black aesthetics, self-fashioning herself to inhabit and disrupt oppressive spaces as a Black woman, and to cultivate wholly new and separate Black affirming spaces for herself and others in a society structured through anti-Blackness, right? The endemic violence against Black self-fashioning. Thus, through her production and embodiment of Black aesthetics, she was simultaneously engaging in Black world-making, practices invested in Black liberation, and the rejection of white recognition as a marker for the value of Black life. Here, rejecting white recognition can be understood through Toni Morrison's discussion of her literary-based Black aesthetic engagements, where she committed to decentering the white gaze in her work to privilege Black ways of knowing and being. My mother's aesthetic practices centered on claiming Blackness as central to her everyday life, which in turn helped me come to know and see the possibilities of Black being in an anti-Black world, as an educator and researcher to Black youth myself. Through a combination of various states of presence, conceptualized by Chastity Bailey Fukuru, my mother's aesthetic presence, visible presence, and presence through strategic actions were grounded in her knowledge that schools, just like society, work structurally to marginalize and miseducate Black students and other historically marginalized students of color. As a result, my mother knew that there were limits to what schools could achieve on their own to counter systemic marginalization. Right. So a big core component was this idea of how does she instill sort of resistance in her students, resistance in herself and her Black womanhood. And I place resistance as core, foundational aspect to my theorizing of Black aesthetics. And again, just not resisting, right, but also existing beyond the confines of anti-Black racism. And so just as I come to a close, and thinking about the way sort of youth specifically leverage Black aesthetics through their love of Blackness for a better tomorrow, I'm reminded of a cipher performed by a group of Black high school students I taught writing to in the Midwestern US. It was actually the very first research project I conducted as a doctoral student in my first year. So these students were among who we now consider the Trayvon generation. And in this moment, suddenly, police brutality became common in their daily lexicon, and they were sort of making these precise noticings almost every day of the ways anti-Blackness was showing up in their lives in a myriad of ways. So these students are now engaged in teaching and research around how their Black textual expressivities were operating simultaneously as critiques of the nation state and anti-Black violence, while also exposing ways of being Black that depart from such violence or had nothing to do with violence and suffering at all. The assembling of Black interior worlds. So in this clip I'm going to play, you're going to hear briefly from a student I refer to as Shayla, who was kind of opening the cipher for the rest of the group.
We supposed to be free, but then we have So America has a split personality. We supposed to be free, but then we have police brutality. We're a white man. When a white man can kill nine people and walk away without handcuffs, but they waited to say the plan was there to take her mugshot like it's good enough. They act like it's the Black people's fault, like we don't got no knowledge. But Michael Brown got killed and he was gonna go to college. Dr. King was able to pray and be not violent, but people get killed and hurt, and we're supposed to stay silent. They take an oath to protect and serve, but do we not deserve to be protected? Say her name, Black Lives Matter. They think all lives matter should be. All lives matter, man, you could have fooled me. Stand your ground really means Black people don't come around. Michael Dillon thought Gordon Davis' music was too loud, so he grabbed his gun and fired 10 rounds. And Dillon thought that he was protected by the same law that let Zimmerman go free. And people dare say there's no racism in this country. No racism. We killed Trayvon then. When are we gonna understand that it has to happen again? And while Young got life plus 90 years, the police can kill somebody as long as they can say that they fear. How can freedom be our mentality if our only reality is police brutality?
Okay, so just as I'm ending, I'm coming to an end. In her final rhyme, Shayla poses the question, How can freedom be our mentality when our only reality is police brutality? While the question does wrestle with Black being and the possibility of Black people being free, it does not close off the possibilities for a Black freedom reality. Clarence Terry Sr. explains freedom reality as the acknowledgement of and striving toward freedom and self-determination as the natural state of being Black or Blackness, an acknowledgement that he says stands in sharp contrast to the unnatural state of being African in America, a being ordered by and subjugated through racism. How is it that freedom is our mentality when our reality is shaped by police brutality and other forms of anti-Blackness? I think this offering becomes an invitation to move deeper into the Blackness and Black world making I seek to engage through Black aesthetics. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coles, and again, Dr. Wilson, for so much wealth of knowledge and heart and soul. And I don't even know if I should be saying anything after you have said so many beautiful things and helped us to reflect. I really believe that the things we do, and not to be just in our minds, not to be a cognitive exercise. These are the things we do from the heart, from the soul, from the spirit. And I was very honored to hear you, both of you, speak about these. So one of the questions maybe that I will pose for reflection, heart reflection, soulful reflection, whatever you can offer, is how does or can Black aesthetics complicate this idea of a point of reference, so this reality of a point of reference when we are doing our research? If we are to do, let's say, for instance, there's been a lot of point of references now, as I think Dr. Gloria Wilson mentioned, the idea of that Black life is more than the terror of our experiences. There's been a lot of emphasis on the pain that we have suffered as a people, and we continue to suffer, as a point of reference, a starting point for our research, even like trauma-informed and so on. But now we're talking about Black aesthetics. So how does Black aesthetics help us to look at a different point of reference, which ties up with the ideas of resiliency that we all talk about? The reason we're still here is because our ancestors were resilient. There was always an attempt to eliminate Black people, and we continue to be here. We're still present. So how does Black aesthetics take us to that space where you begin to look at a different point of reference? And in our processes as researchers, what can we Black people bring into the research space, not be as recipients of, here's your point of reference, this is what you've suffered, the usual thing, and stop talking about even to the point of no longer speaking about solely or mainly or primarily on references that have to do with the colonial, what the colonial people did to us, right? Or the enslavers and so on. So how do we bring that into the fold? And I have more to say that I'd love to really engage, but I just wanted to, put it out there and see if this made sense to your hearts. Please do go ahead and share. Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in, but I think it might be more like I'll say something that, jump in and out, because I think it's interesting, and I'm smiling with this question because I think it's one that I'm actually resistant to, right? And I think I think that and not saying that this is not what the question is saying. I think in both of our presentations, all of that was present. I think there was so much beauty, there was so much joy. I think there were so many points of reference. And I was reading this comment the other day, and it was kind of like, what is it? Particularly people who are disciplined, like, people in the academy, kind of like break out in hives, right? When people want to talk about terror and anti-Blackness. And there's like this immediate pivot, like, what about the joy, right? As if that's not currently simultaneously present. And I think there's a big push in the academy for that right now, right? Like people are like, well, what about this? Like, what's next, right? And so in my work, I want to be clear. I don't think, at least from the intellectual choices I'm making, Black aesthetics, which is this expansive, beautiful thing, can be theorized without thinking about terror, right? Without thinking about suffering. And it is not to say that it is all of that, or it needs to be the point of reference. But I think, like most life, like points of reference change, right? Depending on needs, depending on context, depending on what's happening, who's talking, who's listening. And I think when Wilson started out earlier thinking about Black aesthetics being both clear and opaque, right? I think that there is going to be some fog in there. There is going to be something that's propelling us too. And I reference James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing. I think that's one of the most beautiful examples of a Black aesthetic, because he's simultaneously saying, yes, we are treading our paths through the blood of the slaughter, right? But we are overcoming. And so I think my simple answer, and I would love to hear what Glorisa is thinking, is, there's a wrestling with both. I don't think it can be an absolute, like, why is joy not a start point or a point of reference?
I agree, Justin, sincerely. And I think what has really opened up for me the idea of how we can exist. First of all, many of us are that are on this webinar, have some connection to the university, the institution, the education pipeline. And the way that we've been taught is, what constitutes research, what constitutes research method. And Catherine McKittrick, and her notion of Black method kind of throws all of that, out the window when, Black people are always using, what has been considered citational practices. The ways that we move, even in my reference to, the kitchen, there is an understanding, in the intimate spaces of Black kitchens. We understand that not just to be the physical space, but we understand that to be a part of our body. The kitchen is at the nape of the neck. But the things that we are already doing, and the ways that we are, to my mind, is the articulation of aesthetics. So it's in part a survival mechanism, but it's just a way of being. And so, McKittrick has these long footnotes in her text, Dear Science, and some of those footnotes take up the entire page. It's because we're talking about all of the elements that are known to us, who occupy spaces of Blackness. And it could be, playing cards, it's playing the dozens. That is aesthetics. I tend to trouble and complicate how the word aesthetics has been defined. And I'm working through that, in this project of Black composition, because I do think that there is a way that Black people already exist that is aesthetic, and it has nothing to do with the way that, the white stream or imperialist or colonialist grammars have defined that. And so I think, what this work requires, and many of us, again, have been connected to the educational process beyond compulsory schooling. And so we get the chance to study these things. My question tends to, ask, how can we bring more people into these conversations? I would love to open up my class to the community, but then, therein lies the question of how do these logics of capture keep us tethered to labor such that we can't study together, you know, at all hours of the day. And, you know, knowing the historical foundations of education, K through 12 education in this country specifically, it never had anything to do with learning per se or study per se, but more or less these notions of compliance and order in service to a labor force, you know, once one receives the graduation diploma. And so when I think of aesthetics, I just think of the ways that we are and how we know each other. You know, we know each other with a look. We don't have to say anything. You know, we can be in a room and just look at each other, and we've said a whole, you know, we've said a whole dissertation just in a look. You know, black people have ways of being necessarily and in relation to violence and what is produced out of that. I mean, is a joyful way of being, you know, being unencumbered by the white gaze, and not having to, as I said before, you know, mask or comport ourselves to be otherwise in these institutionalized spaces.
Very good. So I will thank you both. And I will press on a little bit here, maybe add a few more touches to my provocation. So when we teach in a context where most things, if not all of reality, is looked at in binaries, right? So when we talk about aesthetics, and then, you know, Dr. Wilson, you pointed that this idea of concept, the way the concept has been passed on to us, it has a particular way, you know, way of framing what aesthetics means. And Dr. Coles, you talk about the fact that it is not just the part of the beautiful experiences that are, you know, the aesthetics. It is more than that. But yet, when our students enter classroom and several researchers talk about aesthetics, they're talking about from a very Western discipline perspective. You know, you talk about humanities, you know, human geography and so on. They talk from that perspective. So how does Black aesthetics, in the way that we are looking at it, with the pains, the victories, the you know, all the hardships and everything mixed, right? Because it is in that resilience that you see the beauty, right? You cannot have resilience without having gone through things. And the beautiful thing of it is you're able to sing while somebody is actually hitting you, right? And torturing or do whatever it is. And Black people have done this, have demonstrated this in life, right? And we do this in different ways. So how do we, and this is the part of the question really I wanted us to articulate a little bit more. How do we bring this into such a binary, maybe, you know, certain dominant ways of looking at what aesthetics are? And here we are saying Black aesthetics can be this revolutionary force in the research space. Thank you.
Well, I can just say something really quick, you know, it's something that I find myself saying in my classes and to friends and anyone, you know, who listen to me asking questions. I think the revolutionary thing is to actually think about what the opposite of aesthetic means. You know, if we are to go back to, you know, the Western way of defining, that would be anesthetic, which is to numb something. And so aesthetics is feeling. So, you know, all the things that we have been saying conjure, you know, a palpable affect, you know, and so when I think about Black people and our ways of being and our ways of doing, you know, it is bound up with affect. And so, you know, I think, you know, think of it in reverse, that which is opposite of numbness.
You muted.
Sorry, I was giving the praises to that response, but then also just making sure so that you're kind of having us think about all of these sort of expansive ways that we're thinking about it. What does that mean for classrooms and the students that we teach in these universities? Yeah, to be clear, I'm not sure about that just yet. Like I don't know, and I think partly is because it's my, putting my own self here, on trial. I'm doing this work, as I mentioned earlier, our laptops are plugged up. Some of us might be on university campuses or not, but we're doing this work in this space that is really not meant to do that. They would, if we all were able to get into classrooms and university spaces and think about Black aesthetics the way we are doing in this call, right, then we probably wouldn't be allowed in anymore, right? Like it would be, or it'd be a whole different kind of university. And maybe that's the point of it. So I think I just want to, for me, building on what Gloria said, but also just stopping, like, I don't know. I think that's something I want to think about collectively. Because I think that's like an institutional building sort of a question that as an individual, I don't know if I have the answer to.
All right, thank you very much. I will open, if anybody has any questions or comments or reflections, but thank you. Your answers are taking us in the right direction, at least the direction that will be very helpful to reflect on further. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Floor is open. I think we have about, 10 minutes, I think, to do that. Yeah. I know we're trying to not operate in a very modernist way, but the more silence we have, the less time we'll have to talk. So yes, if silence is what we need, that's fine, but just, yeah. Well, if you have a question in the Q&A, please just jump in and ask because I may not be monitoring that space. Yeah.
I guess we did it.
Yeah, Francisca says that there's a question, but whoever is asking that question, may you please just.
They said that we answered it. They were just asking us to give clearer definitions.
But I have a comment. Can you all hear me? I'm on a, so I'm struggling with whether I should weigh in on this. First of all, just thank you to everybody. I came in late, so my apologies. I missed how everything started, but I absolutely have been deeply stimulated by the presentation. So thank you for that. So my name is Sharon. I'm at University of Maryland, College Park, and I want to come at it with a multi-generational kind of thing. I've been spending the last year or so, I've been in academia on the administrative side, professor for the last 28 years. And to answer the last question, what I'm thinking about, and again, this is, give me the permission to think out loud, it's not going to probably make a lot of sense, is I think part of how we begin to infuse and think about this work is we have to continually, multi-generationally, myself, I'll speak for myself, continue to learn, continue to understand, continue to sort of do the work of trying to, because in some of your presentations, I saw fabulous examples of where I don't have the discourse, I haven't had the discourse in my years of doing this work, but I've been living the work of Black aesthetics, doing things that position us. So I think we have to continue to think across generations of academic scholars. And one reason why I say that is, for me, the last year or so, or even beyond, has been about trying to make sure I understand what's cutting edge coming through that will educate me, that I can continue to sort of learn on, because we have to be able to see the scholarship when it's coming through the pipeline at various stages, to affirm it, to understand it, to be able to block some of the barriers that are going to be there when someone says, and sometimes we might be that barrier if we're not staying engaged. So it's very rough. I'm just saying thank you. I'm in a learning space. I'm trying to understand, and I'm inspired. I'm in a learning inspired space. I just want to thank you all for that. And I think that's how we have to keep doing the work in the midst of a nation that's trying to continue to erase every aspect of our existence. So it's just I needed this to close out my week. So thank you so much.
Well, if there's no other question yet, or somebody's still thinking about it, I wanted to ask, another thing I wanted to follow up on was the idea of this radical ancestry that, you both touched on, even though Dr. Wilson named it, but, Dr. Coles also spoke about this in a very similar way. So would you elaborate a little bit on that? Just what can we learn from it, and what does that mean? And even, to the question of multi-generational, aspect of it too. But yeah.
Sure. I think the concept came to mind as I was processing, what does it mean to begin from the position of Black? And one of the reasons that I articulate publicly how I've been positioned within the US, and that came from my mother and her understanding. She doesn't remember saying that to me, but as a 6-year-old, you kind of, like I couldn't have made that up. My mother is sort of articulating, if you, are given forms in school, you're to check the box marked Black. And so there's a way of receiving knowledge when you have been positioned Black. And so what made me think about this a little bit more deeply is attending these conferences and seeing and I have a complex relationship with these thoughts, but seeing, white scholars who are studying Black people or who are studying Black children, there seems to be, if we look at the patterns in publications, there's this trend of studying Black girls. And I can only speak about my field, white scholars who, to my mind are, potentially reproducing the harm that has always been imposed on our bodies, because what's curious to me is that these scholars don't socialize with Black people outside of their scholarship. And so my question is, what are you doing? Or what is it that you think you're doing? I've been known to say that in conferences. And so when I think about radical ancestry, it is my way of pointing toward those thoughts. And it speaks toward the interiority of Black life, what happens when we are together, the conversations that our parents have with their Black children about, what to expect as they go out into the world. And we know that, teaching pre-service students in our field who are primarily white, we know that they don't have those same conversations at their dinner table. And so when I talk about radical ancestry, I'm wondering when they're going to pivot and start interrogating their ancestry, and so it's sort of a signal to point, to that direction, that, that's where my thinking with that term comes from.
Yeah, and in line and also different, I think, in the ways that I was thinking with ancestors, whether people directly connected to me or not. And when I heard that term, it made so much sense to me, this radical ancestry. And particularly when I'm thinking about like some concepts of Afrofuturism, particularly this idea, like past future visions that Alondra Nelson talks about, and how when we're thinking about Black aesthetics, when we're thinking about futurity, possibility, whatever you want to say, joy, it can't be like just in the now. And I think that almost also connects back to why I'm so insistent on speaking about origins, because like it's all about like old new. Even today when I was saying this thing of like new worlds, it's not like it can't ever be like truly new, right? Because that means that we're disconnecting ourselves from our ancestral plane. But it has to be, how do we always think across our past, our current times, and our future times to really do this like conflation of time and space that I think Black people have always done. And I to the point that Glorita is making, I don't think perhaps, at least not in similar ways, other sort of cultural peoples may do that, right? I think they disconnect themselves from time, right? And that's how they're able to create new narratives that sort of that counter how we are, and we're like, well, wait, well, we're still with our people in the past, right? We're still thinking about that, and they're like, well, we're done, right? Like, there's a way in which we have to stay committed to being all time, all space. And that is connected to this multi-generational conversation, right? I mean, all of us know, Black people, I can't start to talk about, like, as if I didn't come from these people, right, who raised me. No matter what fancy degree I got, no matter how I'm now eating something that I never eat growing up, like, I need to always remember that. And that gets me to the future. And many times it allows me to say, I'm eating this new thing and it's nasty, right? And it's not as good as this old thing, right? And then I can recreate something better for the future. And so that's really, I think, how I'm thinking about it in connection to that. Yeah.
Thank you very much to both of you for such a wonderful, wonderful, set of presentations and responses. And it really, the final comments bring us back to the introduction when we'll talk about Sankofa, the idea of time in the African cosmologies. And this multi-generation aspect is very much interlinked. And so is radical ancestry, or connection with ancestors, land, and so on and so on. So I'm really grateful for having been a part of this. And Brother Wilson, Okello, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. And I'll pass the mic to you.
I'm so full. Thank you all so much for your generosity, for your thoughtfulness. If we could just take a minute to show love in whatever ways make sense to you. You can clap, use the features, but we just want to extend our deepest bows of gratitude to you all. Thank you for giving us so much to chew on, to think with. I'll end with two questions for each of you, and as we transition into the weekend. What are you working on, and what are you reading? And I'll allow that to be our final words. Thank you all for joining us for our third webinar in the series. Our next webinar will be in April, and we'll be discussing the notion of care. But as we leave, Dr. Coles, Dr. Cossa, Dr. Wilson, what are you working on currently, and what are you reading currently?
So it's always, God, we always have a million projects, don't we? So I'm working on extending the project around the doctoral gown, to sort of harness the collective, to harness this radical ancestry. I was invited to do an exhibit with a friend of mine who is a printmaker in Indiana, and that show will happen in 2026. So I'll be doing lots of sewing to make these garments. And I'm always reading Christina Sharp. I've read In the Wake 7 times now. Right? You gotta go back to it. But Ordinary Notes, I'm trying to dig into that. I just got that, and so I'm excited about that. Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you said that. I think people think I'm addicted to In the Wake. So now I don't feel so bad, but it just came at the right time. I think for me, I think for the world, I think people committed to this work. And it's just so beautifully written and accessible. So maybe I'll read it again. I am currently reading, and it's been I've been picking it up, putting it down, The Black Interior Essays by Elizabeth Alexander. And it's basically like this tour of more like a traditional notion of Black aesthetics, like arts and letters, that she is doing these essays about. And one of my favorite chapters, there was already a lot in this presentation I really wanted to incorporate in here, was it's like doing this examination of Jet magazine, which was just Black as fuck. And like reading about it, I was like, damn, like this is so good. And then anyway, there's a line, they're like, if there was something Black during the time Jet magazine was around, it was in Jet magazine. And so thinking about those kind of ways of Black aesthetics, and really, I think, expanding outside of my field of education, as many of you on this call know, which is why I'm so excited to be in conversation with Gloria, education can be a very limiting field. although they think they're so advanced, but the way that they think isn't really expansive. So that's that. And then my project, as I think about how to actualize this with youth, I'm actually doing this sort of national project right now called Black World Aesthetics, where I'm working with 6 Black youth across the US in Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City. And sort of I work with them virtually, and they're essentially like sort of documenting their lives through art. And so we're kind of collectively thinking, what is a cross-national, urban Black youth sort of aesthetic, and how that can be used to inform educators.
It's very easy to answer the first question. One of the core works that I'm doing is really to articulate Cosmo Ubuntu as a theory that derives from our ancestral wisdom and so on. And so I'm going to spend a good amount of time writing it out, because the written word seems to be what has been anyway. But that's one of the things I'm doing. In terms of reading, actually, I'm refraining from answering that question, because what I'm doing is to try to listen to spirit, try to listen to ancestors, try to learn from that. So that's my reading, my main reading, and then I have these secondary readings that I'm doing, like colleagues like Hanata Vete Congolo, who's working on the same aspects of similar to Ubuntu, but in the Caribbean, how the Black people transport that cosmology into the Americas and so on and so on. So I'm trying to read work around this connection, this global connection of Black people and how we think philosophical, theoretically, and all of that. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing, but thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you all again so much for your generosity, your brilliant thinking. And thank you all for engaging us in this conversation. Again, we will follow up with an email. You'll be able to circle back. I'm thinking about Dr. Wilson's invocation to this idea of study and really what Black study is about. And so hopefully you'll be able to revisit and to engage with the work on your own. And so again, thank you all so much, and we're wishing you all peace and kindness this weekend and throughout the month and the rest of the academic semester. Thank you all.
Yes, and thank you so much, Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you for your yes. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.